Good morning, folks. My name is Tom Dwyer here with the Department of Public Service. I want to thank everyone for joining the meeting this morning. We're here to continue our discussions regarding the development of CDG billing and crediting performance metrics and associated negative revenue adjustments. Just a couple quick housekeeping items before we get started. Carlin, can we go to the next slide? So here are the procedures for today's meeting. It'll be the same as the meeting we had a couple months ago. Everyone is muted upon entry. We ask that you use the raise hand function at the bottom right-hand portion of the screen. Raise your hand. Folks will call on you, make your comment, and we hope to have a discussion that way. I think this is pretty effective last time, and we're going to go with it again here today. For those that are calling in just on the phone, you can raise your hand by hitting *3 and then again hitting *3 to lower it. Please use the Q&A for like technical issues only. Excuse me, generally not going to be monitoring the Q&A, and we're not going to be checking the chat function. So encourage folks to raise their hand and make their comments verbally. As I noted, the meeting will be recorded and posted afterward, just like the first one. So here's our agenda for today. We'll really quickly just do a little intro and background. And then we have a couple brief presentations by staff. One is a follow-up from the prior meeting where folks had asked for a little bit more background information on some of the existing NRAs that are in place today. And then the second presentation will be on some of the utility data capabilities. And really, the goal there is to provide some level setting so that we have a better understanding as to where we're building off of when we create these performance metrics and associated reporting requirements and things like that. Following the staff presentations, we have a presentation from the joint utilities who are going to discuss kind of the current state of CDG and then advance a proposal they've developed for a performance metric system setup. And then after the JU presentation, we have a what I refer to as the industry proposal from the industry that is a group of interested stakeholders, including NICEA and Arcadia, Jewel Assets, some of the folks we heard from in the prior meeting. Again, hope to have kind of an open discussion throughout on these presentations, and then we'll wrap up and discuss next steps afterward. So real quick. In fact, I'm not really going to go over this. This is the order from September. We went back up. There we go. The order from September that kind of set up this process, recognizing the some of the ongoing issues with the billing of CDG, and directed this stakeholder group to get together and work on the development of performance metrics. We can go on to the next slide. And, jumping right into, picking up from our discussion in the last meeting, I'll turn it over to Craig Carroll, who's going to just provide a brief discussion on some of those existing NRAs that are currently in place.
Thanks, Tom. So as we touched on in the last meeting, customer service performance mechanisms include various metrics to incent good customer service. The mechanisms vary among the utilities, however, all include three main metrics. First, the complaint rate. In general, an initial complaint is submitted to the DPS call center staff by the customer. The utility is then notified and provided an opportunity to resolve the issue. If the utility does not adequately resolve the customer's concern, the customer may escalate the complaint. Calculated complaint rate is based on the number of escalated complaints. I should just back up as all these metrics would include broad-based, so they wouldn't exclude any type of particular type of complaint like CDG. So a complaint that comes in regarding CDG related issues would be included in these metrics. The second metric is the satisfaction survey, another broad-based metric to gauge the overall utility performance. The survey mechanism is, yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. You're coming in a little faint though. A couple of folks having trouble hearing you. Could you either get closer to the mic or turn it up a little bit?
Is that better?
Yeah, I think that's a little better.
Okay.
Thank
The
you.
second metric is a satisfaction survey, another broad metric to gauge the overall utility performance. The survey mechanism is typically administered by a third-party vendor and based on the recent customer's transaction experience with the utility. Let's pause there if there's any questions, or else we can move on to the next slide. The third main metric is a telephone response time metric. This is designed to reduce the amount of time a customer is waiting for a company representative to answer the call. The calculation is based on the number of calls answered by a representative within 30 seconds and typically within defined business hours as in the utility's respective joint proposal. So those are the three main ones. The overall mechanism may include other metrics to incent improvements in those particular areas, which are typically implemented through individual rate proceedings. And failure to achieve any established targets of these metrics would result in the utility incurring a negative revenue adjustment, or NRA. That's all I have. So I can pass back to Tom. Or
yeah, and just any other questions? I know that we're pretty high level, but any questions on those existing or metrics? All right, well, we'll keep moving right along here. The next staff has just a brief presentation on, again, some of the data that we've been collecting, and we put together in sort of some summary tables to just to try to draw the point out as to where we are sort of level setting with respect to the current billing issues and the current utility capabilities. With that, I think I'll turn it over to Rick Schuler to get us started on this conversation.
Thanks, Tom. So, in order to have negative revenue adjustments, you first need to measure performance, and here we're concerned with CDG billing timeliness and accuracy. So first you need to actually measure the performance, and then you need to set a standard or a target on the performance, and it's the instances when the utility would fail to meet the performance target, that would trigger the negative revenue adjustment. So to that end, we did ask the utilities some questions, and you can go to that slide, to see where they were at and how they compared across utilities on their ability to track the timeliness and the accuracy of the billing and crediting performance. And we asked a bunch of questions, and we tried to quickly summarize what we got back in the next two slides. This was quickly done. I'm not sure how accurately we captured the information that we got back from the utilities, but in order to give folks a flavor of what we were looking for, we asked questions along the lines of the extent to which the utilities have automated the tracking of the timeliness of their CDG customer billing, and this was kind of tricky because this is really the way we asked it was to what extent are things being done automatically versus manually, and some of the utilities, you know, don't track that specifically, and you know, as you'll see further on you know, some of the utilities have trouble tracking timeliness specifically, whether it be manually or automatically. So the second row got into again, it was maybe a cart before the horse, whether there was a quality assurance program associated with their timeliness tracking, and you know, if of course, if the company didn't track timeliness, they don't have a quality assurance process. And then the ones that did have a quality assurance process or did have a timeliness metric didn't have an extra specific quality assurance process for timeliness, but some of them did have you know, other controls in place that were intended to ensure the accuracy of the metric. You know, some of the metrics that we envision would require the count of CDG customers. Like if you were to do an average timeliness, you would have to have it by, you know, customers and the number of customers in the denominator. So we asked a number of questions on what data the companies have collected or amassed over the last 2 years. In order to set a target, it's important to look at the performance of the measurement over recent time. That's helpful oftentimes in setting a target. You want to set a target that's impossible or that's a slam dunk, and it helps to look at performance over time in that regard. So for the most part, the utilities did track the number of CDG customers over the last 2 years. Some could provide it every month. Other ones had it for a few snapshots of months over that 2-year period. And then in regards to how many of those customers received accurate billing statements, that was something that the companies did not appear to track across the board. And if you go to the next slide, please. So we asked, as I said earlier, we asked a number of different questions trying to get at the to get at some of the information we've summarized here, and the companies do check for the accuracy of bills in their normal billing processes, and that's summarized in the top row. And Carlene, I think you can jump in here. I think you were more involved in this part than I was. And we also asked.
Oh, are you talking about the staffing levels?
Yes.
Yeah, so we asked, you know, if how many staff are you know, committed or on staff for just for CDG billing, and then if there are staff additions planned. So I just indicated by utility, you know, how many people, how many full-time staff, and then also what their plans were for the future. And some utilities said, we do have like across the board, full-time, employees that work on both. So I tried to narrow it down to actually what were specific staff. And then the next one was the, what contributed to the automation delays. Several companies said, different changes in the regulatory requirements delayed the original automation. Some of them have, value stack already automated, and then they're working on volumetric.
So this is just some of the information that we collected, summarized in these tables. I mean, the kind of the goal was twofold: to see where the utilities are at, and what they have tracked versus what they still need to track, and then the other part was to kind of, look at best practices by comparing across the utilities. I mean, I think our overall goal is that we would have kind of consistent as possible, a measurement and reporting process across the utilities. This would definitely be helpful for those stakeholders that provide service in multiple utility service areas, that they're dealing with the same metric definitions and same metric standards and same reporting frequency, and so we, that was our goal, and I guess we can open it up for questions or move on, but I think we were maybe somewhat disappointed at some of the areas where there was limited or no data on the types of reporting or other questions that we asked.
Thanks, Rick. And that was one of the things that I was gonna highlight. I think maybe that was one of the conclusions to take from this, is that some of these data points that maybe staff expected that there would be like reporting or there would be tracking on, it's just clear that there isn't. So it kind of sets the stage for probably needing to require some additional type of reporting and tracking of just some of these processes at the onset. I do want to pause and see if folks have any questions. I know the real meat of our discussion here today is going to be on the presentations from the joint utilities and the industry. But before we turn to those, I want to give folks the opportunity to ask any questions. Anything from either the earlier slides on the metrics or this. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier too, when you do raise your hand to speak, please identify yourself and who you're representing if applicable. Yeah, it looks like we have Twiggy. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Twiggy Mendenhall with EcoG Energy. Great presentation and findings. Just curious, there were a lot of language around customers, but not CDG sponsors. So happy to see that there's a lot of customer mitigation. But billing deficiencies have also impacted the developer, aka the CDG sponsor's ability to bill and collect payments from utilities as well. So just curious if you had any findings or specific questions about that. Thank you.
So our focus for these questions was more on the kind of looking at it from the individual customer impact level. Obviously, though, we certainly recognize that when, if there's an issue with billing the customer, there's likely an issue with billing or collecting of payments from the CDG host. I do think one of our the presentations later on is going to get into a little bit more of those host specific impacts. So I don't want to give the impression that we're, ignoring that impact, but for at least for what we tried to do here with this initial type of like level setting round, it was mainly focused on, when we're talking about numbers and occurrences, it was focused at the customer level.
And definitely as we refined our data collection, we would ask for, what performance is tracked, for sponsors or projects. I mean, I think just like kind of stepping back again, I mean, we've kind of gone a little bit backwards in this process. We've had presentations on the actual, like, NRAs and dollar amounts, but before you can even do that, you need to actually have the performance measurements, and that that's something that would need to be reasonably defined and tracked and potentially audited, or have some sort of assurance on it.
So just pausing to see if there are any more questions on this. There we are, Luis. Let me. There you go.
Can you just summarize in terms of what you just said? It's not that these things can't be tracked; it's that they're not being tracked. Is that a correct summary?
No, some things were tracked, other things weren't. But
what you're just saying is you can't, if you have a performance metric, you need the data to ensure that metric is being met before you could even consider any kind of negative revenue adjustment.
yes.
What I'm asking for you to summarize is there anything you were asking about the capabilities about that you thought could not be tracked? It's just, do you understand the question? I'm just trying to understand if what you're finding is that it's not possible for the data to be collected, or the data are not currently collected. That's what I'm asking you to distinguish between.
I think it's the latter. I mean, anything can be collected and monitored if you put enough resources on it.
Right.
Yeah, that was basically what I was going to say. I think it is the latter. I don't think there was nothing that seemed like obviously that it could not be collected. And, I think the utilities are going to present in a little while. Maybe they could share if there's data points they think it would kind of be impossible to track. But I think it's really just that to date, they have not been.
Excellent. I just wanted to have that distinction made clear. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands up on this. I think we can turn to the utility presentation. If you could just give me one moment. Thank you, Carlene. There is a handful of folks from the utilities who are going to present, and I am going to ask them to raise their hands now, if possible. That's Mark, Kim, Renan, and Sarah Margaret. There we go. There's Mark. I'm going to make him panelist. Thank you, all four of you. Just get you all set up here. All right. And I think, Mark, were you going to get it? Oh, perfect. You're already on it. All right, looks good. We can see that. Mark, you should be able to mute and unmute yourself. You won't need me to do that now. So whenever you're ready, you can take it away.
Great, thank you very much. Tom, can I just ask, can I do a quick sound check? Are you able to hear me?
Loud and clear.
Great, and the slides appear to be up on the screen, which is excellent. I'm much more familiar with Teams than I am with WebEx, so I'm grateful for any patience as we page through the slides here.
Looks good.
Great. Well, thank you very much to everybody for joining the discussion this morning. We as the Joint Utilities look forward to continuing this and continue to talk through metrics that we think are appropriate, talking through the features of programs related to CDG that we think will help streamline the entire process and make this more satisfactory for all different kinds of parties. Just to mention a couple of items in reflection on the first portion of the meeting this morning, the presentation from staff. Thanks again for that. A couple of things that we heard about were consistency and how that would be important across the companies, in particular, consistency about metric measurement and reporting. We hope you'll find that as we present the proposed approach that the Joint Utilities would like to advance, that consistency is consistently applied. So we want to make sure that we bring that to light as well as the other features of the program that we'll put forward. We also want to make sure to recognize that we are aware of the impacts of CDG and its various complications and the implications that that's had on different kinds of entities throughout New York State. And we're looking forward to continuing to advance these programs in a way that's optimal. So without further ado, let me just pop through the first couple of slides quickly. We're just going to cover a quick overview of some CDG matters that are particularly important to consider as context for this conversation. We'll highlight a couple of features of the market growth and just to we just want to make sure to bring attention to the strength of the CDG market and how important it is to New York State. And then I will turn over the microphone to Kim Peterson from National Grid, who will talk a bit about the performance metric proposal. And we'll have a brief conversation around that, and then we'll turn to an evaluation of the way these metrics can be measured and the way these metrics can be applied in an NRA and what the potential financial impacts are and how those will drive performance. Finally, we can talk a bit about the reporting aspects of this proposal and make sure that the information that the companies would like to be able to bring to stakeholders is going to be useful information. And then we'll turn to a Q&A and look forward to some feedback on what we put forward. All right. So just as some of the context, as I mentioned, we want to make sure just to quickly bring some attention to the fact that CDG is an important aspect of the clean energy transition. We want to note that the pace of change has been rapid in New York State. There have been a number of different iterations in the development and different kinds of programs that have been applied, and that has yielded some significant benefits for customers, participants, CDG hosts, et cetera. But at the same time, it has resulted in some challenges that have materialized as well. And as everyone on this line knows, some of those challenges pertain to billing and crediting. The Joint Utilities would want to emphasize that the companies all remain firmly committed to providing timely and accurate bills, and there is an extensive amount of work that's taking place within each company to advance their programs and their capabilities in this regard, including automation efforts. And we've had some conversations around this in prior stakeholder events to talk about the status of automation of billing systems, and we can have a little bit more discussion around that and what some of the data points are that can be measured and how, if that would make sense in the Q&A portion. But really what we want to make sure to bring attention to is the fact that there are different companies among the Joint Utilities. Companies have slightly different strategies from one company to the next related to how they're automating the value stack and the end feeder compensation, excuse me, in particular for CDG, and in particular because there are different flavors of these CDG programs. Excuse me. Different companies also have different timelines for their automation based on where they are in various regards operationally. And these differences in timelines and strategies that make sense because the different profiles of the companies imply different tracking capabilities that exist today. But we would also note that what exists today is not necessarily going to be the state of the world in the future. The companies are all putting a lot of effort into developing these programs and these billing systems that will have advanced capabilities that are not available today. Will be a better future for everybody. Bottom line, though, is that there's a shared objective for facilitating a successful rollout of CDG programs of all flavors making sure that CDG automation efforts are completed effectively and that any billing and crediting concerns that remain are resolved quickly and appropriately. All right, so with that as some contextual background, I just want to turn quickly to some data just to highlight where we are in terms of the development of the CDG market. These are 4 different measurements of the essentially the pace of change of the CDG market over the course of the last several years since its beginning in roughly 2017, 2018, 2019. This is really encouraging. It shows that there's been consistent growth, and we expect that there will be continued growth in future periods. In particular, we would want to just note that the participation levels among satellites is increasing. This is the top right-hand chart. And in line with that, we've seen a marked increase in the cumulative capacity of CDG projects, which is in the bottom right chart. We're up over 1.2 gigawatts of CDG capacity right now. This is indicating a strong market for CDG in New York, one that the companies want to continue to support, and one that we certainly share the view that this is an exceptionally important part of the clean energy transition, as I mentioned a few moments ago. So just wanted to make sure that everybody had these data at your fingertips as you consider what is going to be shared next by my colleague, Kim Peterson, and then we'll turn to Sarah Margaret Geisler and Rana Corno from Edison in just a moment. But Kim, I'm going to turn over to you and advance to the next slide.
Kim, we can't hear you. Looks like she just reconnected her audio. We'll give Kim another second to get set up here. Still not hearing you, Kim. All right. She's having a little bit of microphone issues. She's gonna call in on another line. We'll just give her another moment here to get set up.
Hi, this is Kim. Can everyone hear me? I just called in.
We can hear you, Kim. Thank you.
Okay, my huge apologies. Like everything was working up till it was my time. Okay, so thanks, Mark. Apologies for the delay, everyone. This is Kim Peterson from National Grid, and I want to talk about the performance metric proposal that the JUs have come up with. Our intent was to keep it simple and measurable across all utilities and to really drive into the item that we thought is most important to the stakeholder group. So with that, we are proposing a bill timeliness metric that is based on the application of credits to satellite bills that is tied to the host billing cadence. The importance of this metric is very well known amongst the stakeholder group. since credits on satellite bills are what is monetized by hosts to realize their revenue. Credits applied within 2 billing cycles after the host bill during which they are generated will be considered on time. And this comes directly from the 2017 VETR order. So using this example shown in the blue boxes, if the host bills on March 1st and we have a satellite bill that bills on March 15th, March 15th is the first opportunity to apply credits to that satellite. So 1 bill cycle later would be April 15th, and 2 bill cycles later is May 15th. If credits are not applied by May 16th, they would be considered late for that particular satellite and would count towards the metric. If over the course of a year, less than 90% of satellite bills had credits applied in this 2 bill cycle time frame, the first tier of the NRA would apply. And we'll go into NRAs in just a few minutes. So as you saw in the staff presentation, not all the JU have current capabilities to track the bill timeliness metric. Our systems and reporting processes would need to be modified to report this data. With that in mind, we're proposing that there be a 180-day implementation period to allow the JU to stand up their reporting on this metric. Next slide, please, Mark. Okay, so now let's look at what we propose to be included in the metric and what we propose is excluded. New CDG projects would move into the metric 90 days after the first full billing cycle as the CDG host. This is to allow time for any issues upon interconnection to be resolved before measuring the regular billing cadence of satellite crediting. Exclusions to the metric relate specifically to actions that are outside of the utility's billing control. So these include the host not providing allocation lists within the required timeframes, along with any technical issues with the project that could cause the host not to bill in its normal billing cadence. So for example, if a satellite is on an ESCO and the ESCO does not supply timely billing information to enable production of the satellite bill, that bill would be excluded from the metric. Another exclusion to call out is credits to the expanded Solar for All projects. There's a different mechanism to apply those credits to customer bills. And at least in National Grid, hosts participating in that program get monthly payments for their generation that is independent of the timing of customer bill credits. We'd also like to say that any future regulatory changes to the CDG program would trigger an automatic pause of the NRA mechanism to allow utilities to implement those changes before being subject to an NRA on future changes. And finally, the JU recommends that the Commission consider a sunset period for the NRAs. As automation takes hold across utilities, the kinks get ironed out and metrics show desirable performance, NRAs should be evaluated. So I'll turn it over now to my Con Ed colleagues to further explain our proposed NRA methodology.
Thanks, Kim. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. All right, my name is Ratanan Corno. I am with Con Edison, and I'll be presenting on what our proposed negative revenue adjustment is tied to this metric. We believe this does result in meaningful risk to the utilities to support the goals that we all have to provide timely and efficient crediting. These metrics that we're proposing would be measured and levied against each of the individual investor-owned utilities, and the level of the financial impact is dependent on 2 components. The first is the percent of CDG credits issued within the 2-month time frame described previously by Kim. For the purpose of this slide, we're calling that on time. The financial impact also scales with the amount of value stack CDG compensation in the calendar year of the measurement period. So with those two levers in mind, we're proposing 4 tiers, each a row in the table shown. The first column indicates the tier, i.e. the performance band that results in the associated revenue adjustment. The second column indicates the utility's proposed revenue adjustment for that tier. At the conclusion of the calendar year, each utility would fall within one of these 4 tiers and would incur the revenue adjustment for that tier, if any. The last 2 columns demonstrate a potential financial impact to utility based on 2 illustrative levels of annual value stack CDG compensation. The first one being $100 million per year in credits generated by the host, and the second level at 250. For the purpose of assessing any revenue adjustment, the utility's actual annual revenue would be used because we don't have forecasts and we don't know what that will be. We're providing these levels just to illustrate potential revenue adjustments. Because these revenue adjustments would be proportional to the market size of CDG, each utility's potential exposure increases as the CDG market grows. The first row is Tier 1, which is where no revenue adjustment is levied. Utilities would need to issue at least 90% of CDG credits within 2 bill cycles to fall in this tier. Tier 2 is the tier which results in the minimum revenue adjustment, which is calculated at 0.5% of value stack CDG compensation and is incurred if crediting performance is between 80 to 90% on time. Tier 3 is the next performance band, when the utility issues between 70 and 80% of CDG credits on time and results in a negative revenue adjustment and would result in a negative revenue adjustment of 1% of value stack CDG compensation. So as you see, the revenue adjustment increases as potential performance decreases. Tier 4 is the last performance level, when less than 70% of credits are on time. This would result in a negative revenue adjustment of 1.75% of CDG VETR compensation. Due to the various penetration levels of CDG across the utilities, we're proposing to cap an individual utility's revenue adjustment at 5 basis points, up to $2.5 million per year. However, for Con Edison, we're acknowledging that the $2.5 million cap may be relatively lower to comparable customer service performance metrics at our utility. So we're proposing just setting the cap at 5%, 5 basis points, without a fixed dollar limit. The value of a basis point is determined in each utility's electric rate case and grows with the value of the utility. We believe this statewide approach in sizing the revenue adjustment accounts for both the scale of the CDG market and the size of each particular utility. Overall and over time, this could result in over $20 million in utility exposure to these revenue adjustments statewide. After describing these potential revenue adjustments, I want to reiterate what we said at the beginning and throughout, that we do have a shared objective to be in Tier 1 and to avoid incurring any revenue adjustment. Next slide, please. We're proposing reporting metrics in addition to the one that results in the negative revenue adjustment. And these metrics reflect our willingness to be transparent and to provide a leading indicator to our performance with regard to CDG crediting. We're proposing that these metrics be publicly reported on a quarterly basis, 30 days after the conclusion of the calendar quarter. The quarterly report would provide several measurements broken down by month. This includes the number of CDG projects, i.e. hosts, that generate credit and that are included in the performance metric. We would also report the number of CDG projects for which the utility calculated credits. The difference between the first two would be the host for which the utility did not calculate credits. Third, the report would include the number of active enrolled CDG subscribers to those projects. And lastly, the total amount of value stack CDG credit generated by month. For each quarter, utilities would report the percentage of credits that were applied to satellite bills within 2 billing cycles, The report would include the 3 prior quarters of reported data for up to a total of 12 months of trailing data. So this concludes today's proposal by the Joint Utilities of New York. We'll turn it now to any questions that stakeholders may have, and I'll invite back my utility colleagues to respond to those questions. I want to highlight we're all working in the individual capacity of our respective utilities, although this is our joint proposal, and we will do our best to answer questions. If there is any pregnant pause, it may be we're just trying to find the appropriate person to answer. So thank you in advance for your patience.
Thank you, folks, for the presentation. We have some hands up here. I had one quick question. Could you go back to the reporting slide? Yeah, sorry, I didn't quite catch the last one. I wanted to check. Yeah, on the second to last bullet, just you mentioned within 2 billing cycles, and just wanted to pull it on that thread a little bit. Is that typical? I guess maybe I'll just ask utilities like to justify 2 billing cycles. Why is it what was that the range selected?
Okay, Tom, so I'll jump in on this one. The 2 billing cycles comes directly from the VETR order that was issued in 2017. I think the actual language in that order said 2 months. We know that utility billing cycles can vary, like for instance, the National Grid, they're anywhere from 28 to 35 days. So rather than tie in a number of days, we equated it to billing cycles.
Got it. Thank you for that explanation, Kim. Let's go to some of our stakeholders here. I see Luis with their hand up. Go ahead.
Hi there. Thanks, JU folks. One question, I'm seeing that we definitely have timeliness addressed, but I'm not seeing any effort to address accuracy. So can someone explain why that wasn't part of the performance metrics and associated negative revenue adjustments that we'd be looking at here? Because we have both issues, right? Timeliness and accuracy.
I'll take the first stab at this, Ron and Corner with Con Edison, and others might add some perspective as well. So we're taking timeliness as kind of the pressing issue to really get at the heart of what matters for CDG crediting. And I think looking at this long term, with utilities working on system automations and some of them already having those in place, those automations provide more built-in controls around accuracy. And while they do enable more timely crediting, the accuracy piece we think is more kind of covered in the automation processes that the utilities are performing.
Great. So that would mean it would be an excellent time to put forward the data so we can track it and make sure we don't end up where we are now with timeliness, just in case it doesn't work, would just be my humble suggestion as we look forward, since automation should address accuracy.
Great. Just moving through here, I think the next person with their hand up was Aviv. Go ahead. Oh, you just remuted yourself. Hold on, let me unmute you again. There you go.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Aviv Shalgi from Solar Simplified. Quick question. Other than the expanded Solar for All projects, are there any other projects that are included in this tiny asterisk at the bottom? Thank you.
So this is Sarah Margaret Geisler with Con Edison. So if we can go back up to slide, let's see, 6, I think. Yeah. So this is where we have our include and exclude. So the things that would be excluded from the reporting are the same things that would be excluded from calculation of the metric. This is because we wanted, and with I think everyone's agreement that we need more transparency on this data. We need to build a record moving forward. We thought that it was advisable to report consistent with what the metric includes or excludes, so that we don't have sort of two ideas of what's going on out there. So that's why we had put that asterisk in to say, if projects are included because of, untimely credits where the delay is caused by the host or other extraordinary circumstances, if it comes out of the metric, it comes out of the reporting. But that's not to say that it's there forever. It can go right back in, potentially the next billing cycle. Does that cover it?
Yes, it does. Just a quick follow-up, if you don't mind, Sarah, and thank you for explaining. Regarding that first bullet with the untimely credits because of the host, I'm pretty sure, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that the previous orders suggest that if the host does not submit an up-to-date subscriber list, then the utilities should use the existing one. Is that incorrect, or did you guys mean something different?
So yes, understood. And I think that this, so that's a good point, and maybe we can take that one back. But
Sarah Margaret, this is Ryan.
yeah.
So I think what we were particularly thinking of here is when the host does not complete the CDG application for the first round of credits, the initial allocation list, because that's required to be submitted 60 days prior to interconnection, because that interconnection date can sometimes be, a moving target, and the CDG application, including the allocation list, does not always align with that, technical interconnection process. There may be times when the utility is not afforded the 60-day time to set up the project for billing, and this is meant to account for especially that first list. If that first list is never provided, I think case-by-case basis, utility determines what to do, oftentimes banking at the host, like you mentioned.
Of course, perfect. Thank you, Ronan, and thank you, Sarah Margaret.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks, folks. I think the next person with their hand up was Georgina. Go ahead. Oh, sorry, I'm unmuting you. You muted yourself again. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. This is Georgina from Perch Energy. I wanted to first second Luisa's suggestion on including accuracy of actual billing, because that has been a consistent problem. And I think it's one thing to get credits on a customer's bill, but if we just end up rebilling everything, that doesn't set us up for success. So would really encourage us to look at that. The other thing I wanted to ask, though, was it seems like this negative revenue adjustment only applies if the actual CDG host bills. Is that correct? So if there's a delay in actually billing the host, would this NRA not apply? Because I know we've seen, significant delays in actually getting the host to bill, and that would have to happen in order for credits to be applied. So just trying to understand whether that is a trigger for the application of this NRA. Should I restate the question or?
I think they're probably huddling amongst themselves to
Okay, that's
determine
okay.
who's going to answer.
That's
Yeah.
all I was gonna say. Give us a second. Yeah.
Take your time.
So this is Kim. I'll just kind of jump in while we're, I think our thinking in this was that the host has to bill in order for credits to be applied to the satellite, right? That's a pretty obvious statement. So measuring the timeliness of the credits applied to satellites was really important. We know that that's also why we built in the 90-day time frame before a host gets into the metric, because we know that there are sometimes issues upon or either right before or right after interconnection that can impact generating that first, second, or third host bill. Some of those issues are outside of the utility's control. Some are not. So we just want to have a reasonable period to adjust for any first host bill anomalies.
Thank you, Kim. Yeah, I guess I would say I've seen a number of projects where, for reasons that fall outside of those exclusions, all the host allocations are submitted, the CDG applications, everything that's necessary, and the project should be on the billing system, but it takes months to issue that first bill. And if the trigger is the actual issuance of a bill in order for an NRA to kick in, then, we're just sort of building delays upon delays. So I guess I would urge us to reconsider the actual trigger. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think also with automation, I can't speak for every utility, but just representing National Grid, with automation, we do have a normal, what I would call a normal process for getting that host bill generated shortly after PTO. If any other my colleagues want to jump in, feel free.
I'll just say if we go back to the timeline, I believe our intent was when we say that the host bill date, right, that's not necessarily when the host bill is generated, but is the earliest point at which the host bill could be generated. So that would be the start of what triggers the cycle of the measurement.
Hey folks, this is Tom. I just got disconnected briefly from the call. I came on to hear the end of I think that was Renahan's answer to a question. And I don't see Georgina's hand up anymore. So with that assumption, I'm gonna think that answered your question, Georgina. No need to raise your hand to respond. Next we have Adam Conway. Let's go to there we go. Go ahead, Adam.
Adam Conway for New York City. I have a question about the first threshold for the NRA where the credits aren't timely applied for more than 90%, or I guess it'd be more than 10%. Effectively, what it reads to me is that the utilities are asking for kind of like a 10% freebie on timely billing applications. And I guess my question is, with the move to automated billing, which I think all the utilities are either at or close to, or should be close to, with the 10% exclusion, should we assume that the automated billing applications are going to kind of come with a up to 10% error rate in terms of timely application of credits? Is that sort of the expectation by the utilities?
This is Kim. I'll say emphatically no. We are not expecting a 10% error rate in timeliness at all. We did see in previous proposals in the last stakeholder session that 100% was the threshold put out there, and that's simply not a realistic expectation either. There there has to be some room for anomalies that can go wrong. There's a million reasons why a bill might not be produced on time that have nothing to do with CDG. So that's, you know, that's why we're not on board with a 100% threshold.
So do you have sort of like an expectation of what the standard error rate will be on when the systems are automated?
So Adam, I don't think we have that. I also think we're setting this at 90% in recognition that these are brand new metrics and we have no baseline data. So in comparison to other performance metrics, you know, we think this 90% is pretty fair. Obviously, our goal is even higher than that, but at least to initially establish the metric, we think 90% is the right place, given the level or lack of data we have today.
Okay, just looking at the attendee list here, I don't see any other hands raised. Do want to just get
Well,
folks.
I have a question.
Oh.
This is Rick Schuler. I'm
Go
sorry.
for it, Rick.
Yeah, thank you. On the slide Ronan presented, number 8, would the difference between the first bullet, the total number of projects, and the second bullet, for which generated credits, is that a measure of like the backlog of yet to be sent out bills?
Hi, Rick. Yes, so the difference would be the number of hosts that the companies, you know, the respective utility should calculate and allocate credits for, but did not as of that reporting period.
Okay, and then the previous slide, number 7, the actual VETR compensation like would not reflect if there's a really big backlog. The denominator in that one.
So this would be calculated at the conclusion of the calendar year. So you know, potentially backlogs which were resolved would be included, but backlogs, say at the very end of the year, may not. But I think this is easy with a reconciliation in subsequent reporting periods.
So there would like only be like 1/12 of a backlog kind of impact.
Potentially, but this could be trued up so that no you know, no compensation is left behind in the revenue adjustment.
Thank you. And was there any thought about whether or not, if there was, I think the proposal was to report quarterly, if there was a really bad quarter on its own, could there be a metric on that, given that like 3 good quarters could compensate for 1 bad quarter?
Rick, so I'm understanding your question, are you saying asking if utilities looked at metrics that might be applied just based off of 1 quarter as opposed to being applied annually?
Yeah, or is there a way you could do an annual thing, but still get the impact of 1 bad quarter?
So I think a couple things make quarterly application of NRAs a bit challenging. One is that because there is this sort of 2-month crossover where things are in or out of a metric, it's just not, you know, there might be a bill that looks like it's late, but it's not really late. yeah, I think the reporting and the metric lend themselves much easier to an annual true up. And the other thing is, I don't know that there's actually a precedent for any other NRA being set on a quarterly basis. I'll defer to staff and others on that, but that just seems, overly burdensome on the utilities.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily suggesting that it would happen on a quarter by quarter basis. It was more like, is there a way, like at the end of the year, to figure out if any of the quarters were particularly poor performing?
Well, I guess we would know that from the reporting itself, right?
Yes.
Yeah. All right, if there's nothing else on that, we do have a few more hands up here. I think Adam was the first. Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, thanks. Just a follow-up question on the last slide here that you have up right now. I noticed that the phrase that CDG feeder projects was used, and that other projects would be excluded. I take that to mean that the utilities are proposing to exclude the phase one NEM volumetric projects from the metric. But I guess first I wanted to just confirm that that's correct. Then second, to try to understand why that's being proposed. And then the third question along that would be, do the utilities, or can they provide sort of statistics on which percentage of their overall CDG project base represents the phase one NEM projects?
Just making sure the utilities are confirming and that someone's not talking away on mute.
Confirm, yes, that's right. We're just trying to find the right person to respond. So please bear with us. Thanks for your patience.
So I think the general consensus amongst us is that, we specifically labeled these slides VETR CDG because they relate to value spec projects. Volumetric projects are excluded. The billing is different, and there's no actual VETR compensation for the utility. On those projects, we don't get, net crediting revenue or anything, cost of service recovery at all. On the volumetric projects, I will say that for National Grid, that subset of phase one NEM projects is very small. It's, just marginally over 10% of our total CDG hosts. But as that number of CDG hosts continues to grow, obviously that number is fixed because there was only a certain window of eligibility for those projects.
And I know you might not have numbers specifically on hand for the other utilities, that is, but any other utilities want to just provide maybe just an order of magnitude as far as the size of those grandfathered NEM projects compared to the whole CDG portfolio? Or if you're unable to do so at this time, just acknowledge that.
Yeah, Tom, hi, it's Ron. I'm with Con Edison. We have 7 net metered CDG projects, providing credits to about 300 or so subscribers, and that represents under 2 megawatts of total capacity in our service territory. And because the net metered CDG program is no longer open, we believe that's that population will just stay or declined. And just to add, just in terms of relative to our value stack CDG population, we have over 440 value stack CDG hosts providing credits to over 15,000 customers, and that is growing, as we saw, at practically an exponential rate.
You beat me to that follow-up question.
And because I provided the megawatts, I believe we have about 100 megawatts of value stack CDG. Thank you.
Right. I do see we have several hands up. I think, Luis, you have been patiently waiting the longest. There we go. Go ahead.
I'm not patient, Tom. No, I'm just kidding. Kim, you mentioned a 180-day period, after the PSC would issue an order before the metrics can be assessed. Can you just explain if that's how long you think across all the utilities it would take before you could provide the data to assess, or is that assuming you would be providing data sooner and then it would start to build the record around the performance? Does that make sense?
Yeah, as we've seen, in the automation process, it's not as simple as just clicking a button and being able to get the data. Speaking for National Grid, we actually have to build additional queries into our billing system to be able to track this data. It's not readily accessible. I don't know, there's a lot of information that was provided to staff on other utilities' capabilities. So I think that's on the smaller side of the time frame that it would take to stand up the processes and the testing. Anytime we build something in the billing system, a really significant chunk of the time of implementation is devoted to testing. We can code it more quickly than we can test it, and that's because we have to do a lot of what they call regression testing, which means that we're not breaking any other billing functions in the billing system. So, to provide good data, that's why we are asking for that 180-day implementation period.
Okay, understood. So that's the first time. It's not like there would be data before that is what you're proposing. It would be that would be the 6 months later would be the first time anyone would start to see data.
Right.
Got it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, folks. Got a couple questions from staff here. Go ahead, Carlene.
I had 2 questions. One was just answered by Kim, that they don't have the systems already in place, so this would be something they'd have to build. My other question to Kim on her slide about new CDG projects, what was the timeline for the consideration? There wasn't 2 billing. Okay.
So, yeah, so 90 days after the first full billing cycle as a CDG host is when they would enter into the metrics reporting.
Okay, thanks.
And I think, Pete, you also had a question. Still muted, Pete.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, this is kind of a question about us staff being able to track the projects in the CDG hopper that the metrics are going to apply to? And I don't expect a final answer right now. And it kind of is a question related to what NYSERDA can do. And it is kind of a NIGATS question as well. And what I mean is, would you consider putting some kind of tracking mechanism, use of some kind of field in NIGATS to just indicate which CDG projects are in play here, for the new metrics? So, and like I said, this would kind of be a NYSERDA question as well. So we can build a process and some kind of capability in NIGATS so that staff can have a transparent and accurate way of tracking exactly which CDG projects we're talking about, that are in play for the metric. And like I said, I know this is kind of a question that would take some work, but I'd like to at least get your initial reaction. Thanks.
That is an interesting proposition. I will say that there may not be complete alignment between what's in NIGATS and what are in the utility queues or have already interconnected. It's optional for the customer to take the e-value and for the utilities to register the RECs. So there may be projects that are excluded in NIGATS that would be included in the metrics. There may be other, this is probably worth a deeper dive, but there's just a lot of different factors that may not make that reporting be what you would anticipate it would be.
Yeah,
Maybe
I understand.
one
Go ahead,
other
Kim.
option would be, one thing we didn't show on this slide is the introductory slides with the graphs is the utility interconnection queues, which we all saw the hockey stick like trajectory of the graphs, but the queues are even more steep than that. So there could be, we could talk about a way where, in addition to getting a look back in the reporting, maybe we do some queue reporting. Although I think that's all in the CERT inventory reports as well. So yeah, there's lots of different alignment, but lots of things to consider with using NIGATS as the definitive source.
Okay, yeah, I anticipate an answer like that, and that's good. And we can, staff can follow up later and have a discussion in the future about this as well. But I think that would be important. Thanks.
All right, thanks, folks. Just looking back at the list here, I don't see any other hands up. I'll pause to just give folks an opportunity to ask any additional questions of the JU before we move on. All right, well, not seeing any, I do want to thank the joint utility folks again for their presentation today and for their participation in the discussion. While we transfer around here, I am gonna just move the utility folks back down to the attendees and then get some of the our other the next group of presenters. So just bear with me one moment. And while I'm doing this, if I could ask the folks from for our next presentation to raise their hands so I could assign them. That's going to be Kate, Austin, Luis, and Aviv. Wonderful. All right, so I think we're all set up for the next presentation. I do know we've been going for a little over an hour and a half, and I thought it might be nice to take just a really quick break. I'm thinking like 5 minutes or so. It's 10:24 now. Let's get started again with our next presentation right at 10:30. All right, folks, it's 10:30. I think we can get started again. Again, welcome back to this stakeholder conference on CDG billing and crediting performance metrics. Our next presentation today is from a group of interested stakeholders here. Kate, I think, are you taking the lead on your side? Oh, well, you're sharing your application. That's a great start. I'll turn it over to you and you can take it away whenever you're ready.
Sorry, it took me a second to find the unmute button. Thanks very much, DPS staff, for convening us this morning and for the joint utilities and the other stakeholders on the line. It's been a great and thoughtful discussion so far. My name is Kate Daniel. I'm the Northeast Regional Director with the Coalition for Community Solar Access. And I'm here presenting with a group of interested stakeholders and community solar providers with a joint proposal from the New York Solar Energy Industries Association. Our presenters here today have had, extensive experience with crediting for community solar and CDG, and can speak to, common experience and also what successful billing and crediting should look like. So I'm joined today with Austin Perea from Arcadia, Louise Gava from Jewel Assets, and Aviv Shalgi from Solar Simplified. So we'll spend a little bit of time today on some background and context, but really devote the majority of our presentation to diving into our proposed performance metrics and negative revenue adjustments, and allow some time for Q&A. Off the bat, I wanted to, present some context for the group behind the proposal today. So again, I am with the Coalition for Community Solar Access, or CCSA. We're a national coalition of businesses and nonprofits working to expand customer choice and access to solar through community solar, with over 100 members, and really looking at solutions for community solar programs centered around the experience of the customer. We're really happy to be partnering with NYSEA, who's been around for, almost 30 years as the only statewide membership in a trade association dedicated to solar energy in New York State, and representing business interests across the solar segment. CCSA and NYSEA often collaborate on issues and work together with other representatives of the clean energy industry. And I'm, especially proud of our deep collaboration with our members on this topic, given that it is a novel topic and very detailed, and we're happy to have such dedicated members to bring their thoughts to bear. We've been meeting for months to, gain understanding of the common issues across projects and providers, and identify the real priorities driving these discussions, and create a proposal that is meaningful and effective. So that's driven by coming up with key objectives to, developing performance metrics and resulting negative revenue adjustments. At its core, this is really about ensuring a positive experience for the community solar customer and addressing any sources of dissatisfaction. We've crafted these metrics and NRAs really so that they're never used. The idea here is not about slapping on extreme penalties to the utilities, but it's about identifying the systemic problems and finding ways to implement solutions and upgrade systems in order to avoid the delays and errors that we have experienced to date. And so that would ensure the timely and accurate allocation of credits, processing of CDG reports, regular and detailed reporting, and responsive communication and resolution of complaints. It's critical to make customers whole when they've been harmed by these billing and credit errors by making sure that they receive the full value of their CDG subscription and any credits owed to them. But in addition, it's important that customers that have had negative experiences should be compensated with remedial bill credits to demonstrate the importance of customer service and make sure that there is ongoing faith and restore any lost faith in the CDG program. This was mentioned earlier, but we have used the consumer service performance indicators as a foundational basis for our proposal. As staff mentioned, this is a standardized set of customer service performance measures reported monthly by all investor-owned utilities. And a key piece here is that it requires a level of data, involves an audit by the Department of Public Service in order to be able to assess where utilities are in these metrics. And it includes indicators such as complaint rates, results of customer satisfaction surveys, and call answer rates, which really translates directly to a number of elements within the CDG billing and crediting world. So we'll go over a set of 7 proposed metrics today, including CDG credit allocation, timelines, CDG transfer credit accuracy, the accuracy of satellite bank credits, communication response rates to DER providers or hosts, host reporting, credit reporting, and CDG customer complaint rate. And again, given the importance of having the accurate data to assess these metrics, we expect that audits of utility data would be necessary to achieve these. Key to our proposal are, a few core principles related to how negative revenue adjustments should be used. And foundational is that these revenue adjustments should be significant enough, again, to incentivize utilities to be able to update their customer information systems and billing systems to address the underlying errors. And so, given that, and given the promise of automation to streamline a lot of this processes and reduce human errors, we are proposing that the consequences of not meeting the performance metric should increase in a post-automation world. The NRA should also be set on a relative basis so that it aligns incentives and especially including other incentive mechanisms around customer performance and interconnected distributed generation to make sure that these still provide a sufficient incentive for utilities to adjust their systems. We've spoken about remedial bill credits, and it's important that those customer remediation impacts should be additive and that they should not impact the value of CDG credits that customers are able to apply to their bill. And lastly, and again, we can't emphasize this enough, that the metrics and the resulting NRAs should be outcome focused, should result in accurate and timely credits and customers that are made whole. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Austin to speak to the first performance metric.
Great, and thanks for that introduction, Kate. By way of introduction for everyone else, my name is Austin Prea with Arcadia Power. We are the largest subscription manager of community solar projects in the US and as well as New York. And as Kate mentioned, Wanted to dive more into the specific performance metrics that the working group has come up with. I believe someone from DPS noted it earlier, but a lot of discussion about NRAs, but of course you can't have that until you have the data from the utilities and the attendant performance metrics that are linked to them. So these first two performance metrics, I would say, are probably the leading ones that we want to be focusing on because they address both the timeliness and accuracy of CDG credit allocation. So this first metric is really designed to address that first part, the timeliness of CDG credit allocation. So we're calling this the CDG credit allocation metric. And it's meant to address the issue of utilities not allocating CDG credits to customers on a timely basis. The most extreme example of this, as folks know, is instances of multi-month crediting, in which multiple months of credits are applied to a single customer's utility bill in a given month. This results in a really terrible customer experience because a customer is expected to pay for, in some instances, hundreds of dollars of credits on one billing cycle. And so this ultimately leads to a bad customer experience and as well as customer attrition. So we want to develop this metric to track this. So the metric that we defined here would be, the definition is the percentage of CDG customers that are allocated CDG credits within one billing cycle of those CDG credits being generated. This is something that we would expect to be reported on a monthly basis across all CDG subscribers for a given utility. And so I think just conceptually, we would be tracking, a utility would be required to be tracking on an individual account level basis whether or not a customer was given, a CDG customer was applied their credit in that given applicable time period. Very binary data and reporting tracking. The NRA that would be proposed with that is that we propose that the utility has up to one billing cycle of the project to allocate that credit to a customer after the point at which the utility has all the data that is needed to allocate a CDG credit. So that being the host report and a satellite read. In terms of the threshold triggers for this metric, we would expect that if more than 0.2% of CDG customers are not allocated a credit in a given time period, then an NRA is ultimately assessed. This would be tiered. We have some illustrative values here on the left-hand column of what those tiers would look like. What we've also done here is have a basis point kind of at risk for pre-automation, as well as a higher basis point allocation for post-automation. Next slide, please. Okay, so for specific to performance metric 1, as well as this idea that Kate mentioned before of the remedial bill credit. And so the customer service performance indicators have set the foundation for this concept of remedial bill credits. I believe Con Ed has referred to this as the monthly bill credit, but it's the basis for credits being paid out to customers to compensate them for when utilities do not meet their obligations to customers. So for instance, if the utilities miss an appointment to a customer, they apply credits in the range of $20 to $50 for that appointment kept consumer service performance metric. And so that's the kind of basis for this. We would propose recommending a $50 remedial bill credit to be applied to a customer in conformance with the requirements of performance metric 1. So I think the way that we're thinking about this is that there actually, for the application of the remedial bill credit, this would not require any additional data needs. You would basically look at the customers that were that did not receive a credit in that from performance metric 1, and then apply that credit. Again, this should be something that is additional to the customer's owed CDG credits. And then finally, we would recommend that this credit value should ultimately be higher for LMI or disadvantaged communities customers, considering their higher energy burden. So those multi-month credits are even a worse customer experience for them. So I'm going to move to performance metric 2 before opening it up to questions. because these are very linked. So this metric is designed to address the accuracy. For performance metric 1 is just looking at instances of CDG credits being applied, whereas this is looking at the actual value. And I should caveat this that the CDG transfer credit accuracy metric, frankly, is a little bit more complicated. And I think I think this metric could be subdivided into additional ones, but we tried to capture all of the instances of the accuracy within this metric. So this is meant to ensure that the credit value on the host report ultimately matches the value that is transferred to the customer's account. And this should be regardless of the split ultimately between the credit amount applied to a customer's energy usage and the credit amount that is ultimately banked to the customer. So this metric is looking to reflect the delta between the value, the transfer credit value, and the sum of the what's called the applied credit and that month's applicable banked credit amount. So the transfer credit in this definition would be defined as the customer's monthly allocation times the monthly production of the system. That is something that is on the host report and is being tracked. That would be looked in comparison to the applied credit, which we are defining as the highest CDG credit value that the customer's electricity bill will accommodate for that month. It will also be the value on the host report, the applied credit value on the host report should also equal the CDG credit that ultimately appears on the customer's bill. And to be very clear, we're looking at instances where the transfer credit amount does not actually reflect what is on the customer's utility bill. And in some instances, there are instances where the customer, while they might receive $100 worth of credits and be able to consume all of that, we have seen instances where some of that credit amount is banked. And so we want to be addressing that within this metric as well. Next slide, please, Kate. So in terms of the actual NRA that would be applied to this, we have two kind of sub NRAs that are applied to this for this metric. So we first, again, kind of have the instances of this, of inaccurate credit transfers. So the one NRA would be based on the percentage of accounts that have an inaccurate credit transfer. The threshold for an individual customer would be that 0.2% of CDG customers are credited inaccurately. In that instance, we would apply an NRA. And then there is a second metric for the accuracy. So this would be based on the total value of the credit transfer accuracy on a monetary basis across all the customers. So if this metric exceeds more than 5% of the total monetary value of CDG credits, we would, especially for mass market customers, an NRA would be assessed in this instance. So this is really looking at the overall value in monetary terms of the credits that are applied to a customer basis. And then we have on the right-hand side, of course, the various tiers for when we would see when we'd see an NRA actually be applied. So those are a lot for those performance metrics. I'll hand it over to Aviv now to walk through performance metrics 3 and 4.
Wonderful. Thank you, Austin. Hi, everybody. Again, good morning. Aviv Shalgi, I'm the CEO of Solar Simplified. We are a community solar aggregator in the state of New York, as well as many other states, and have been mostly focusing only on mass market customers, which kind of brings us to two other performance metrics to kind of continue and follow on what Austin just presented. Performance metric 3 is kind of a follow-up to performance metric 2 that we've just seen about the accuracy. And whereas the previous performance metric we've just seen talks about the movement, if you will, from from the project to the customers, this performance metric number 3 kind of focuses specifically on the banked credit accuracy versus the applied balance. Basically, what we are suggesting is also to track kind of that disparity between, or the delta between, the applied credit value and the bank, merely for the fact that we have seen instances across multiple utilities in the industry that have shown, that more credits are being banked rather than being applied, even though they could be applied. So the goal of this metric is to basically make sure that the customer, the satellites, are consuming as many credits as possible on each of their monthly bills, and that they are only banking the amount that they have to bank because they just cannot consume that, and not because of delays or inaccuracies or just plain mistakes, especially after we pass through to the automation part of the utilities. The NRA that we are proposing will basically be assessed when the transfer of the credits is not the maximum that should be applied. This is kind of a binary metric, if you will, that is supposed to show either it was accurate or it wasn't. And if it's not accurate, then the NRA should be triggered. Next slide, Kate, please. Performance metric number 4 kind of jumps or segues to a slightly different type of issues we've been seeing on the industry side in the last few months, and that talks about the communication response rates. Specifically, this metric is actually focusing on the communication with the hosts or with their DER counterparts that are representing them. The main problem here is that with many of the utilities, there is no confirmation to the receipt of allocation submissions. It takes a very long time to get responses on questions, and especially on satellite issues. So we get a question from a customer who might have not received answers from the utility representatives, or maybe has just not reached out to the utility because they are our customers and our satellites. And we're trying to fix and mitigate that situation without losing those customers. We've defined this performance metric in the days, the time measured in days, to acknowledge receipt of any human or email communication. And this is not auto responses that, thank you, we've received your email type of thing, but somebody who has reviewed, the ticket, or whether it's an email or some online system. It does exclude EDIs because, again, obviously those are automated responses. And basically have a utility representative to say, we're on it. It's going to take X number of days to get back to you, or at least expected. Multiple tracking of communications, for example, the responses to the allocation submissions, questions, complaints, and obviously the resolution of those questions and complaints. The NRA will be triggered, at least that's our proposal, by establishing some target rates for the utilities responsiveness to each one of these 3 subcategories. This is kind of similar to the call answer rate that already exists, that should be under 30 seconds. But here we're talking about responses to the hosts, not necessarily to the customers. Because we are representing the customers, we expect a metric similar to this to be enacted. Kate, next slide, please. Wonderful. I'm going to pass the baton over to Luis from Jewel.
Hi there, folks. Louise Gava, Director of Operations and Regulatory Affairs for Jewel Assets. Similar to performance metric 5, the next 2 performance metrics are focused on the utilities communication with the DER providers. Obviously, that needs to happen so we can ultimately have a good customer experience. So this metric, performance metric 5, host summary report metric, is pretty simple. It's just looking at how many days does the utility provide the host summary report to the DER provider. In this particular case, we're saying 2 business days after the project's meter read date. And also to assess in supporting tracking and take some of the burden, share some of the burden, we're proposing that for this metric and the following one, there be a process where DER providers themselves can flag when reports are late. Also, so it can be compared to what the utilities are reporting. Next slide, Kate. Performance metric number 6 is very similar and in parallel to performance metric number 5, except this is referring to the actual credit report. So this is the report that outlines the actual amount of credits that are going to be applied to a customer's bill each month. And again, what we're looking at here is how much time has the utility provided this report to the DER provider within. Again, we're proposing 2 business days after the project's meter read date, and we are again proposing a process where the DER provider can flag when these reports are late. Next slide, please. And last but not least, performance metric number 7. So this is the one you really hope you never need, the CDG customer complaint rate. So this is the monthly number of mass market accounts that file a complaint or have a complaint filed on their behalf for billing and crediting issues that are caused by the utility. And this would be complaints both filed to the Office of Consumer Services at DPS and to the utility. Okay, so what's important here is that this probably seems a little bit similar to the customer service performance metric that I think it was Craig started the conversation with this morning and explaining, but I wanna just clarify why we've highlighted it here and why we think that the current metric probably doesn't capture what is needed. So first of all, we're not 100% sure that all of the complaints from customers at this point in time about utility caused crediting and billing issues are actually captured in the current CSPI complaint metric. Second of all, so because of that, we're proposing expanding it to both the PSC OCS complaints, which is what the current metric is, and to the utility complaints. We recognize that some of the utility complaints probably do not get coded as utility complaints or in this bucket because they are perceived maybe not as the fault of the utility. So that's part of having this combined. The second thing that's really critical here is that we have to keep in mind that we're putting the onus on the customer that when they call the person that they think is going to solve the problem and the problem doesn't get solved, to take an additional step. And we have to ask ourselves how important that really is. So that's some of the framing. The other piece here is that we need to think about, and the JU presented this in their proposal, the existing NRAs are based on the total number of customers served by the utilities. Obviously, the CDG customers are a subset of those customers. So in terms of what the trigger is, it needs to be relative to the CDG customers. So it's hard to probably combine it in the same metric. They probably have to be separated. And then last but not least, but probably most important, is the concept of the customer filing a complaint on their behalf or having a complaint filed on their behalf. And the reason that that's important, and Aviv just alluded to it, is that often customers are calling, especially if they've had trouble with the utility and they've called the utility and they haven't gotten the solution that they need, or they've gotten frustrated, they're calling someone else and it's not necessarily OCS second, right? And so this could be, depending on the customer, it could be their DER provider, it could be a utility advocate, it could be a municipality, it could be a social service entity, right? And so we need to make sure that there's a way for all of those entities who are getting involved and have been involved to actually file complaints on behalf of those customers, and that they also count for the trigger. Okay, that's that. Next slide. The last thing I just want to say, that's the end of our presentation. But I do just want to highlight to all of you on the phone that those of us here in the industry proposal, many of us are actually competitors, and it should be a signal to the industry just how bad things have gotten that we're collaborating and problem solving together, right? Because we are competitors. So I just want to flag that here, that at the end of the day, we all have our customers' best interests at heart, and that's why we're coming together with folks we wouldn't normally to solve these problems. So, and I guess with that, we'll take questions on our presentation for all the slides.
Thank you, Kate, Austin, Luis, and Aviv. That was very comprehensive. So I'm sure we'll have some questions here. I'm just going to the attendee list. Don't see any hands up yet. Let me just check the staff side as well. Rick, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, thank you. I think it was the first slide that had the table with the basis point. Um, so is that less than 2%? Is that the like the free band that was mentioned earlier? I mean, would it be 0 basis points with less than 2%?
Yeah, so the expectation, so this is actually less than 0.2%.
I'm sorry, 0.2%.
Yeah, no, all good. I think once we get to a certain point in this market, that will still be like hundreds of customers, obviously. So the expectation there is that, yeah, the acceptable the acceptable band, at least for pre-automation, would be 0 basis points. However, I mean, my understanding, and I'd love to get the utilities perspective on this, but my understanding of this is that once automation is hit, and I think we've been hearing this from the utilities for a few years now, that a lot of these, if not all of these problems, are solved once we hit full automation. So pre-automation, I think we can understand why there should be some variable, but I think that we would basically expect 100% accuracy once automation is hit. Again, would like to hear from the utilities why that would not be possible in terms of just accurately applying a credit to a customer. But I think there should be less wiggle room for freebies once automation is hit.
Thanks. That was my only question so far.
Yeah, any response from the utility on the accurate, the percentage of accurate bills point?
I think they're huddling. I know someone mentioned earlier that they didn't think even in automation they could reach 100%.
Right, right, and that's kind of why I know it was what, like 90% was seen as as acceptable, and according to the utility presentation, and I know they did mention that part of the reason for that was that this is kind of uncharted territory. These are new metrics, and that at least in the initial application of them, we should be looking at providing a little flexibility before we know the real impact here. But I don't want to speak for the utilities if they have additional points, or if there are any other questions on this. I think this is a very comprehensive proposal. I imagine folks are probably digesting a little bit, but love to have a discussion on some of these proposed metrics.
I guess I have a question about the customer complaint slide then, while we're waiting. So the sources of complaint information that's not from either the Office of Consumer Services or the utility complaint handling process. How would we audit or ascertain that those data are correct?
I think this is Louise. I think maybe I misspoke. The data are from, the complaints are from 2 buckets, right? It's the normal process that happens now with OCFs getting complaints, but then it's also the complaints that the utility gets that the utility is saying are based on that are their fault. And
Okay.
then those being combined. And again, the reason is because, I mean, lots of customers do not escalate their complaints. I mean, right? Like we're putting the onus on the customer who has made multiple calls to get their problem solved. to keep making calls and escalating a complaint to get their problem solved when they shouldn't have had the problem happen in the first place, right? So that's the thinking there, is that we've had a long period of time in the industry to be doing this well. The customers have suffered and gotten really frustrated, and now it's time to have other people take on the burden, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sorry, I misunderstood. I thought,
That's okay. It's a lot of text on the slide and I talk quickly, and it's Monday morning. So that makes sense, right? How you would get the data then, because it's utility reporting and the
yes,
OCS. Okay.
thank you.
Yep.
All right, do we have any other questions on the presentation here, or any of the individual metrics?
Maybe we should ask Mark to confirm that the companies are huddling.
Oh, there's Mark there. I can unmute him.
I would just, hey, thanks for unmuting me. I would just note that I think people are digesting. There was a lot of material, a number of metrics to consider, and a variety of things to think through. So please don't take our lack of questions off the cuff here as any indication, just that we're continuing to think things through.
Well, one thing, while, folks are maybe thinking through some of this, one thing I will remind everyone is that we do intend to post not just the staff presentation, but the other presentations that were given today on DMM after this meeting, so that, folks will be able to kind of look at what.
Tom, we lost you.
Question.
Tom, we lost you for a while.
The last thing we heard was it was going to be posted.
I have a question about the communications response metric. Yeah, this similar to the complaint metric. How would this metric be tracked? The utilities would know when they sent the message. There might be maybe a misunderstanding as to whether the message then was received by the host. Would the host have to send back a a confirmation that they received the message, so that the loop could be closed and the utility would have all the data then to calculate the metric?
Richard, I'll jump in. I think there are two ways for us to actually track this performance metric. One is that the utilities know on their end when they've received whichever means of communication came from the host, and how long it took them to reply. I'll give you just a practical example. Right now, NYSEG RG&E are doing a great job of responding, not solving the problem, but just responding. We're on it within 2 business days. And this has been going on for I believe like 2 or 3 years now, which big kudos to them on that. So the utilities know, either they're using an online portal of sorts, or if it's just through an email, they know when they've received our communication, and they can get back to us, and they know when they've gotten back to us with something like an acknowledged, message of some sort. I think on the flip side, we could have the industry report on this as well, maybe as kind of an auditing means. So I wouldn't throw this on the entire industry to start reporting on every individual email, but there is an auditing trail, that's available for everybody, because we are the other side of this means of communication. So this could be measured, I believe, on both ends. And obviously, we're here to raise the flag if something goes completely awry. But the utility already has all of this information. Both looking backwards as well as looking forward. So I don't see a reason why they should not be tracking this. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, they still wouldn't know if the message got.
Let's put the receive, like I get your point. If there's
Yeah.
technical difficulties or anything, we're in 2023. I think that, the likelihood of responses going missing is, pretty low. And if the utility, I'm going to trust the utilities on this. If they're reporting that they've answered within, let's say, 48 hours, or 24 hours, or however much we decide, to be the threshold, I'm an optimistic person, so I believe what they're reporting, and the industry will be there to say, this doesn't make any sense because it's not what we're saying, and then we can, with an audit trail of some sort from DPS or NYSERDA, we could dive into the details, try to figure out what's going wrong. But I think it's highly unlikely that large quantities of responses from the utility are going to go, going to disappear or something like that, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, folks. And sorry, I believe I got cut off again mid-sentence earlier. The second time WebEx has booted me here. It looks like Kim has her hand raised. Go ahead, Kim.
Okay, hi everyone. Yes, so I do have multiple questions, but I can narrow it down to 2. I don't want to monopolize the question answer period. One thing is, and I may have missed this in the presentation, but can someone explain the part of the presentation that addressed when there are exclusions due to circumstances outside the utility control? And I'll give the example of a meter reading issue. There's many reasons why the utility may not be able to get a meter read. Could be something with the customer meter. These things impact billing and yet are not a fault in our billing processes. So that's my first question, if someone could kind of re-point out where that was considered. And then just wondering about the rationale for the 0.2% accuracy. That's, if you take 100,000 satellite customers, that's only 200 customers. That's a very small error rate. So just kind of wondering where the 0.2% was derived from.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. Austin again here from Arcadia. I think we want to, as I mentioned earlier, we want to minimize instances of inaccurate credits where applicable. We were just kind of backing into how many customers this was, and I think from our perspective, hundreds of customers not receiving their credits in a given amount of time, or when they should, seems unacceptable to us, given that the utilities, y'all have said many times that automation will fix a lot of these issues. That being said, I think the industry will, I mean, I think Kate mentioned it at the beginning, but the rationale for all of these metrics is that we want customers to have a good experience. So the NRAs are not, from our perspective, are not meant to be punishing or to be unreasonable. We just want customers to get credits when they're supposed to. I think the industry could be amenable to being flexible about and permitting some reasonable amount of acceptance for for errors on the utility side. But I can't speak for the entire industry on that. Just the fact that 0.2% across the entire state is still hundreds of customers. The first question about reasonable exceptions, I think the same. I think we would make the same point. If there are things that are outside of the control of the utility, again, I think reasonable exceptions can be made for that metric. And I think, again, I think we're still digesting the presentation that y'all gave, but I think there are probably some elements of the exceptions that y'all presented in your presentation that do make some amount of sense. But I think we're still ingesting all of that as well. But certainly saw some reasonable exceptions within the presentation that y'all made.
And I'll just add, like, you can see in the metric, Kim, that we're saying if you don't have the data needed, so if you don't have a host report or you don't have a satellite read, then the metric wouldn't be assessed. So maybe that starts to get at what you were asking.
Yep, great point, Louise.
One more follow-up question. On the one billing cycle, so in the example I showed where the host bill and then the satellite bill, and we have to have all satellites in the allocation bill, what is the, one billing cycle is not always achievable. What is the rationale for the one billing cycle? I understand we all want accurate and timely credits on the customer's bill, but does that one billing cycle proposal take into account, the actual time flow of a utility billing process?
I can jump in here. Great question, Kim. I think we are all thinking about the post-automation world, where, if this has all been automated, and tested correctly, so given some time from today, obviously, because you guys are not fully automated yet, or at least not all utilities are. Our assumption is that post-automation, and after we flush things out, everybody together, this should be technically instantaneous. The moment that the host meter is being read, since the allocation file, let's assume this is in the ongoing, not PTO. You already have an allocation file, doesn't matter when it was submitted. You have a meter read. There should not be any delay. I mean, it could be like server time, 5 seconds or 10 seconds to actually run a calculation of the meter read times the allocation percentages and throw that onto the customer's accounts. Obviously, we acknowledge that different customers are billed at different times, which is why we're giving a full billing cycle in order for that to translate from, let's call it like a server-side data onto people's bills. But that gives you a full month for a calculation that should technically be seconds. Now, we do obviously understand that there are going to be a little bit of errors and a little bit of small stuff, which is why we're saying you can get up to 0.2%, which is still, as Austin mentioned, it's still hundreds of households, hundreds of families in New York who are having issues with their bill. So it's okay to have a little bit of issues and errors and delays, but not a whole lot. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so just a clarification too. You characterize this as being able to apply the credits within 5 seconds, whatever the server refresh rate is. but that omits the understanding that we have to know how much the satellite is billing before we can apply the credit, right? So we don't know. At the time the host bill is generated, we don't know what credit will be applied to satellites. We know it's available to the credit, but we don't actually know what will actually wind up being applied to the credit. So I just hope everyone is understanding that. And, you know, this is for net crediting. The other thing is there could be thousands of satellites on one host. So, you know, just keep that in mind where we're not talking about just tracking one or two things here.
Of course. So first of all, I totally agree with you, and I think all of us, you know, on the industry side, you know, agree. We are talking about thousands, and you know, as you guys have shown, I think we're over 120,000 satellites, which is wonderful. But yes, that is a lot of data that we're expecting you guys to keep track of. I think to your earlier point of not knowing how much to apply, I think that is, maybe we're jumping to performance metric 3, if Kate wouldn't mind to jump over there for a second. You know, I completely understand that it will take time for you guys to figure out, for the utilities to figure out how much should be banked versus how much should be applied, which is, you know, again, why we're giving you a full billing cycle, because the customer, the satellite is going to get either estimated or actually have their meter read sometime during a full billing cycle. And maybe, like Austin mentioned earlier, maybe there are some exclusions if there are, I don't know, some cases where there's no estimation and no accurate meter reading during that that billing cycle. So obviously, if you guys don't have the information, we don't expect you know, we don't expect that performance metric to be triggered or that NRA to be triggered, because you couldn't have known. I would say on the flip side, if the project meter was read, there was an allocation file, and the satellite customer had their meter read, you have all of the information that you need to process however much it comes down to the applied credit, and bank the rest. So at least in our opinion, this should not take more than a billing cycle. If you guys think differently, then obviously, you know, explain to us what it is that we're missing.
Just going to our list here, it doesn't look like we have any other hands up for questions or comments. Just give people a pause here. All right, I'll just one more last call for any questions on the several metrics that were proposed here. All right, well, not hearing anything else. Again, I do want to thank you know, the folks, Austin, Aviv, Luis, and Kate, for their presentation here. As I mentioned, I don't know how much I got out before I got cut off, but we do intend to post all the presentations that were given today online, in addition to a recording of this conference. So folks will have the opportunity to go back and look at some of this information and maybe think about it, digest it a bit more. And all the presenters included their contact information on the slides. Encourage folks to continue the dialogue and reach out with questions for clarification and whatnot. Before we wrap, I guess I just want to take a moment to discuss next steps and where we see that us going in this process. I think the option for an additional meeting is sort of up in the air. I know after this, staff will have a huddle internally to discuss kind of how far along the metric development stage we think we are or think we can get. And if an additional meeting would be helpful, I do welcome others' thoughts and feedback on that point in particular. In fact, I'll pause there now. I do see we have Angela with her hand up. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
You're a little quiet, Angela, but we can hear you.
Okay, so I just have a question that is a more general question, not related to the metrics necessarily. So I don't know if it's okay if I ask that question.
Well, sure.
Okay, so I know someone mentioned it before, right? So most of the folks involved in today's presentations were either the utilities or the folks that are involved on the CDG side of the business. I represent NRG Energy. We are a supplier in the market, and we do often have some issues with how the CDG is being billed for customers that are also taking supply from an ESCO. And I know that things are being automated and stuff like that, but I was just curious to know if and when the ESCO pieces are being addressed as part of this automation, because we are getting some transactions via EDI and then some transactions we're not getting EDI, and some utilities are providing some manual information. Other utilities are not providing all of the information that we need to sort of bill our customers accurately and also reflect accurate numbers in our own systems. So I was just wondering if that is being addressed somehow as either part of these efforts or, separately or how that's working.
Yeah, it's a good question, Angela, and I'll let the utilities, identify or raise your hand to respond to that. One thing I will note is obviously with automation and accurate billing of the customer, that should at least result in accurate billing to the ESCO. But I do understand we're in this kind of mix of automation or partial automation, and that the processes may not be entirely smooth yet. The utilities have anything on that point? I see Kim is still showing up. Your hand's not up, but let's
Yeah.
I guess Aviv, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
No, I didn't actually raise my hand, but I guess I'm interested in hearing more about, excuse me, the ESCO issues with CDG credits. I know there are differences in how we credit the customer's bill based on whether the customer is on a 1 bill or 2 bill ESCO, but I don't think we're all that familiar with what ESCO issues are being impacted by CDG credits. So, if there's a way that suppliers can share that with this group, that would be helpful.
I mean, I can speak to some of the issues that we've had, right? So we are getting EDI transactions with the customer's usage, and we're providing the price to charge that customer, and we are reflecting that in our internal systems. For example, X price times Y usage. And then the utilities are telling us, oh, hey, by the way, that wasn't the usage because the customer has CDG, or, at their location or whatever, and they therefore the usage is actually lower, but we're not getting an EDI transaction that tells us that difference. So in our systems, we are carrying the wrong volumes, which are resulting in our systems having incorrect accounts receivable data. And I'm sure everyone is kind of familiar. We can't just go in and say, oh, well, the utility told us that it should be X, Y, and Z, so we're going to go and change the number, right? Like we need actually some, EDI transaction or other indicator for us to be able to change that, because if we get audited, we will be in trouble. So we've had that challenge with at least one of the utilities where we're not getting the full picture. And I believe it doesn't impact the whole universe. I think there's a difference between net metering versus VETR, et cetera. But, we have seen the problem, and we are therefore, we've been in discussion with that utility to try to rectify the issue. But there is currently no easy way to rectify it, so we're trying to work through that. And unfortunately, I'm not sure if other utilities are doing it the same way or not, because it could just be that we haven't experienced the problem, but it might be that all of the utilities are handling it similarly, that we just have not seen it in those territories. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I see you, Austin and Aviva. I'll just wait and see if Kim had a response there.
No, I think the general consensus is that this is related to a volumetric issue, like meaning phase one NEM projects, which are differently credited. It's actually a kWh reduction on the customer's bill. So, without going down a rabbit hole on this, I think, this is probably maybe just a one-off situation that requires some fixes with EDI that may already be implemented. So I don't have any follow-ups. Thanks.
Let's go to Aviv next.
Great, thank you. I did want to ask a question on behalf of my company. So this is not representative of the full industry, or maybe it's half a question, half a statement. Because NEM projects, phase one NEM projects, have been mentioned earlier during the JU's presentation. We obviously, as an industry, have not discussed that specifically in our presentation. But I personally think that the NRAs and these performance metrics should be tracked there too. I did hear somebody from the JU, not sure if it was Kim or maybe somebody else earlier, said that they are not compensated for it in the form of net crediting. So first of all, I think it should, and it came up in multiple other conversations with NYSERDA and DPS, as well as the JUs, that net crediting should happen for NEM projects as well. But putting that on the side, the fact that VETR and NEM are two, let's call it, separate sub-programs under the community solar, community distributed generation program of sorts, doesn't mean that it's okay to hurt the NEM customers and only take care of the VETR ones. Customers are not to be blamed that they signed up earlier or later, for project X or project Y. So I personally think, and then my company has been servicing both of these types of projects and asset owners. I think that this should be generalized to encompass both of these types of programs, yeah. So this is more for a DPS, I think, versus the utilities. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that feedback. Let's see, Austin has his hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And yeah, again, here also clarifying, speaking on behalf of Arcadia here, not necessarily representing industry, but just in terms of process going forward, I think we had a lot of like great presentations today. I do think there is a lot of detail and specifics around how we're designing these metrics. And historically, at least, I know, for instance, we keep on referencing the customer service performance indicators. That process required a lot of input and stakeholder feedback. So I would just raise whether or not this kind of meeting setting is ultimately the best medium for discussing like really complicated elements of billing and crediting and performance-based rate making processes. So that's partially a statement, but also kind of a question for DPS in terms of what you anticipate doing, or what you anticipate for next steps. Like what are the, I guess, the variety of different types of I guess, yeah, what are potential next steps?
Yeah, so I could see this going a few different routes. I mean, ultimately, our next kind of big goal here is a proposal that gets filed and for commission consideration. So kind of working around that goal, I think it's a matter of, do we want to have additional meetings either in this format or other, potentially other format, like a smaller type of subgroup that meets more regularly or something to develop that proposal. Or I guess potentially as well, I generally have found it to be pretty helpful to, let's say, for example, staff files a proposal, to have a technical conference or some type of meeting after the proposal is filed, but before comments are due, to give parties the opportunity to ask questions, kind of get a better understanding of what's being proposed, to better inform their comments. Something I expected tentatively to take advantage of here as well. So I planned on at least one more touch point, but given that there are a lot of open questions here, and there are kind of some holes in the available data right now, I don't know if we're kind of at this stage of filing a proposal in the next month or so. So I expected that there'll probably be continued engagement with this group. But if you, Austin, or anyone else has any suggestions, or just thoughts for the best way to kind of collaborate as we continue the development of these metrics and NRAs, I'm happy to hear your suggestions.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I'm definitely still digesting a lot of this, but I do think that the route, and again, speaking as Arcadia, not as industry, but I do think that the route that you alluded to of filing a proposal on behalf of DPS and then letting industry kind of mull through that, and industry and other stakeholders mull through that process. I think that would be a good next first step, just in part because, again, there's a lot of specific details around, there's a lot of specifics in terms of data and reporting and the performance metrics themselves that I think a lot of folks, including the utilities as well as the industry, will need to take back to our teams to digest. And I think that the specifics of that might be better in written format, just given the kind of precision that's required. I mean, certain utilities have different metrics, for instance, around how they're tracking some billing and crediting, or what they call their host reports versus their credit reports. So I just think in terms of like ease of digestion, it might be. I think there's probably a lot of benefits to filing a proposal that then can ultimately get digested and get some additional kind of stakeholder feedback. Just my opinion. I'd be happy to hear other folks chime in on that as well.
And well, just one kind of follow-up to that. I mean, generally, I think filing the proposal, that would be ultimately the proposal that goes to the commission, gets SAPA'd and all that. But I guess theoretically, it doesn't need to be. It could be a proposal that's filed, like kind of like a preliminary type of thing that ultimately gets changed significantly before a quote unquote final proposal is filed. Just maybe raise that there is a little flexibility here, and I would venture to say that if we were thinking the next step was a staff proposal, we could probably put that together, but it wouldn't be fully fleshed out to the point where I think it would be fully actionable by the commission. Just kind of thinking about this live here, how we could approach that process.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I think I was that's a good correction there. I think I was thinking more along the lines of a white paper, not necessarily a direct proposal to the commission. So that's that's good feedback.
Greg Collar had his hand up. Let's go to Greg.
Yeah, Tom, this is Greg with UIU. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I just wanted to voice our, I think as we've seen here and as you pointed out, some of the data that is not readily available. And I think wherever route we go, I think UIU is encouraged to have a tech conference on any proposal that I understood that staff proposal might not be fully fleshed out, but I think any kind of tech conference to raise questions before filing any kind of comment to further enhance any such proposal that goes to the commission, I think we would encourage to have that at that tech conference, or whether it's in person or just a WebEx again like this. But I think I would encourage to have that.
Great, thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
We got Luis, and then we'll go to Kate.
Hopefully my last comment here, we all stakeholders on this phone identified timeliness as being important. And I think the timeliness of this process is as important as timeliness of bill credits. And so if we've now heard from the JU that they need 6 months after an order before anything can even happen, I think we want to consider, Tom, what the process, let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And let's build in what we need to make adjustments over time if things go awry, but get that core piece, because it does appear there's a core that we mostly all agree on, and there's a couple details. Yeah, the devil's in the details, but I do think we want to make sure we don't keep having this drag on and on and on, and the customers are the ones that keep having the consequences for it. So timeliness. Let's keep going, or speed up rather, actually.
Thanks, Louise.
Yeah, and Louise actually stole my point, and I think it's important to get the right feedback from stakeholders and do that in an effective manner. I think, obviously there are a lot of details here, and it takes some time to give them careful consideration, but I was going to make the same points around implementation timelines, and that we have some, key pieces of agreement around the importance of timeliness and accuracy. And I'd like to, make sure that we keep moving those points forward and outline, what specific questions and data requirements are needed for stakeholder input, but make that process as expedient as we can.
Yep, agree there, Kate. Go ahead, Austin.
Yeah, just to Kate's point, I just want to reiterate actually something. But I saw Con Ed's joint proposal from filed, I want to say last week, and within the joint proposal, it was functionally around the remedial credit element, which we included in our proposal. But within, I just want to flag that performance metric one that we've laid out. It sounds like, based on what I was reading through Con Ed's joint proposal, that they have all of the necessary data to actually be tracking whether a customer is being applied a credit in a timely manner. And so I just want to, reiterate that I think we are there actually is, to Kate's point, a lot of cohesion across both the utilities and the industry. And in fact, Con Ed apparently has the data to actually report on one of these metrics. So just wanted to flag that for the rest of the group, just so we're aware of that.
Renan, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, just a point of clarification. So yes, it is correct that joint proposal does have certain CDG metrics associated with it. However, there is still a timeline to implement that, both in the proposal itself, as well as in the actual data that we're tracking. And we're actually tracking to begin reporting, assuming the proposal is approved, in September. So that is sorry, my microphone had an issue. That timeline, I think, is fits within what the utilities are proposing of 180 days for implementation. And by the way, that 180 days was under an assumption of one simple metric.
Gotcha. Understood. Thank you, Rena.
All right, thank you, folks. Just going back to the list here, any other comments, questions about next steps? Again, I'll just reiterate, I think the next steps on the staff side is we're gonna huddle internally and decide kind of where the best route for us to go, where we could come up with on a proposal, and then think about a plan for our next round of engagement with this group. I do want to again thank all of our presenters today. A lot of really useful information was shared here. Certainly a lot to go back to and digest more thoroughly in the coming weeks. And not seeing any other questions or anything like that, I do want to wish everyone a great Monday here. Again, thanks for the participation today, and there'll be more to come. Take care, folks.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, everyone.